So we have officially learned that Mexican cartels are going to Ukraine, have been going to Ukraine to learn how to operate drones and make their knowledge of drone usage more thorough. This impacts a lot of people, whether that be in Mexico, along border towns, you name it. And I think that this is a really crazy story that we have to get into, and I have all of the intelligence reports. So thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original with yours truly, Katarina Schultz. Let me tell you exactly how this all started and what's going down. So this summer, Mexico's National Intelligence Center, known as CNI, alerted Ukraine's security service, SBU. I'll be referring to them by their acronyms throughout just to keep it a little more condensed. CNI, Mexico, alerted Ukraine that certain Spanish-speaking volunteers, mainly from Mexico and then from Colombia, were joining the International Legion, and they appeared to not be motivated by ideology, but rather with the intent to learn drone warfare tactics from first-person view. These tactics later to be deployed and used and taken advantage of by the criminal organizations that these individuals were operating with. All right, so in early to mid 2024, so last year, the CNI flagged concerns, formally notifying the SBU that individuals from Mexico and later Colombia were entering Ukraine with falsified documents, whether that be like the country of origin or why they're going there, and they were seeking access to drone fighting centers. This essentially spurred a joint operation between SBU, CNI, and other intelligence agencies in Ukraine, which started in 2024 and then extended into this year. This investigation focused on Spanish-speaking volunteers in Ukraine. Keep in mind, and I'm sure a lot of there's been points in this Russia-Ukraine war where volunteers from across the globe have been going to just fight and try to, I guess, quote unquote, help out. And we've seen videos of this. We've seen people who have been doing this. I've spoken to many individuals from all over the world who wanted to share their stories with me about why they decided to join in on the fight, boots on the ground in Ukraine. And interestingly enough, one individual who had previously reached out to me, this was a few years ago now, I would say, um, kind of at the beginning, a little like maybe a year into the war. Uh, he had reached out to me. Oh, he's an American citizen, previously served with the U.S. Army, and decided to go to Ukraine to fight, and then ended up in Mexico working in some very nefarious people and groups. And I actually saw his sort of lifeline play out before me because he reached out to me before he had even gotten to Ukraine. And then we kept in contact throughout. And then eventually, by the time he was in Guadalajara doing God knows what. But we know that this is a reality, okay? So there was an investigation that was launched, and it focused on Spanish-speaking volunteers, especially those assigned to the clandestine tactical group ethos. So that predominantly operates in Donetsk and Kharkiv. And this operates under some, intelligence agency oversight. Now, investigators noted several recruits who exhibited exclusive interest in first-person view drone training. They sidelined essentially other combat or ideological elements, and it became very obvious what these individuals were in Ukraine to do or to learn. Now, Very specific example of this is a man who went by Aguila 7, Eagle 7, okay? He was a Mexican national who enrolled in March 2024 under a falsified Salvadoran identity claiming humanitarian motives, okay? Because in order to get there in the first place, you essentially have to prove that you're not going there to just brazenly kill people or for motives like learning how to use a drone so that you could go back to Mexico and help the cartels. So I guess humanitarian motives was that for Aguila. Essentially, let me tell you about this guy because super interesting. Aguila 7 completed a full training course in Lvov. There, the instructors drew attention to his high level of training that he already had. Apparently, he worked freely with analog transmitters, noticed thermal blind spots, and had knowledge of radio electronic countermeasures. So, as the investigation furthers, this volunteer was probably associated with the Mexican Special Forces Unit GAFE, GAFE. I'm sure a lot of you know what this is, okay? Some of these fighters from GAF went over to the site of crime and founded the Los Zetas cartel, one of the most deadly and notorious cartels in organized crime history. And this investigation that's going on in Ukraine also mentions that at least 3 former FARC fighters passed through the International Legion, and they used fake Panamanian and Venezuelan documents. Now, the SBU put out some comments and statements on this, and they said, "We accepted volunteers with good intentions, but we must admit Ukraine has become a global platform for the spread of FPV tactics." This publication also adds that some people came here to learn how to kill with a $400 drone and then sell that knowledge to whoever pays the most. I think I mentioned this in a recent dispatch, how sometimes reality is scarier than fiction, and this is a perfect example of that. You know, it's like that typical action crime movie where someone goes to get the special tech or learn a special skill that they can later sell to the highest criminal, evil mastermind bidder. And it appeared as though that's what Aguila 7, this Mexican national, was trying to do. He likely had already operated with organized crime members in Mexico. That's why he showed up in Ukraine with extensive knowledge and wanted to further that knowledge. I mean, I'm a big proponent for learning and being a lifelong learner. This is just not that, okay? These individuals, the FARC individuals in Aguila 7, reportedly showed up in drone-focused units and were flagged via their accents, because keep in mind that this investigation was focusing on people of Spanish-speaking descent and their tattoos. I think if we've come to learn anything at this point, whether it be through Trump's administration sending people to El Salvador, to Secot, or these types of investigations, or even if just looking back over the course of gang violence in the US over the past decades, tattoos will rat you out, okay? You don't even need an informant if you have your criminal history just tatted all over your body. So many of these individuals were facilitated by private military companies, private military company networks that were helping these people sort of get there, match to the groups that they had to learn through, and then I guess operate in Ukraine. So there were these private military company networks in Latin America offering forged documents and travel logistics, which would typically send these people through like Moldova or Slovakia, countries where you can really fly under the radar and there isn't too much government oversight. This allowed these individuals to bypass vetting and essentially get direct placement in drone units. And typically, what this investigation found out is that these private military company networks are allegedly connected to cartel resources in order to funnel recruits into Ukraine. Okay, so we've talked about a lot how cartels have outsourced a lot of what they're doing. And this is a prime example of that. Outsourcing training for recruits to a country in the middle of a war to learn Warzone tactics. Ukraine's training centers, typically in Lviv and Donbas regions, now they're training thousands of people in FPV drone use, construction, piloting tactics, and electronic warfare evasion. So that also includes drone blockers, which we've seen recently has become really common for the cartels. They're using drone blockers like experts, and I've talked about this, and a lot of people were really shocked to hear this. But now it really comes down to, were these guys learning these tactics in Ukraine? I wouldn't be surprised. These FPV drones cost around $300 to $400, and they can deliver explosive payloads with very high precision. And they're widely used in Ukraine's asymmetric warfare, which is very convenient for Mexican cartels because typically these drones are being used to target special forces, Mexican authorities, and particularly in border regions. We've seen a lot of videos of this. So, cartels in Mexico have already deployed crudely weaponized drones, okay? Whether that be like drone dropped grenades or modified UAV bombs. And this is typically for internal conflict. I forgot to mention, also against adversary cartels. This signals how foreign drone training could, of course, significantly increase their capacity. Th- these people already, kind of in a rudimentary way, learned how to operate high level, deadly tech. And then they're going to a country where you have essentially like experts with this asymmetric warfare, teaching your recruits or your existing members how to take it to the next level. Now, the incorporation of more refined FPV tactics into cartel arsenal, which, like I said, already includes drone munitions, could dramatically amplify just how deadly their warfare is. There have been cases where Mexican authorities, and of course adversary cartels, but I think that when they're attacking the authority, it signals something so much bigger because it is the shadow government attacking the legitimate government who allegedly is supposed to have the integrity and responsibility to protect civilians, and they can't even protect themselves due to how far these cartels have taken their capacity to use drones. And here's the thing. If they can amplify the just how lethal they're in the way they're using these drones, it would be a very scary scenario. Again, I think people are going to call me dramatic for this, but I'm not being dramatic. I'm being realistic. You have these cold-blooded killers using drones and learning how to further their capacity through first-person view drones in Ukraine, coming back to Mexico to take on adversarial cartels or fight the government or whoever it may be. It scares me for civilians more than anything. It really does. Now, in response to the investigation and the findings in Ukraine, Ukraine's SBU has established a specialist counter-proliferation unit working with Interpol, DEA, and several European agencies. That also includes agencies in Poland, shout out, and Bulgaria, really just any surrounding countries, to vet volunteers, share intelligence, and disrupt these private military company networks who are helping these people get into Ukraine. Certainly, this isn't something that Ukraine, I don't think, could take on by themselves, considering they're in a war, but also because surrounding countries are being used as like proxies to get these individuals into Ukraine. Like I mentioned, Moldova, you have to kind of have the neighboring countries alert of what's going on in order to avoid this, avoid their access entirely. So there's also now stricter background checks focusing on Spanish-speaking applicants, and certain routes, like through Moldova, are flagged, and so are these certain private military companies. And now they're doing criminal records cross-referencing. So they're really just trying to make sure that the people getting in here aren't criminals, aren't operating for the cartels or any organized crime groups. I think the criminal background check, I think in terms of like Mexican cartel operatives, that's no. That's just not going to work, because as we know, with the level of impunity and corruption, there are a lot of high-level criminals who actually don't even have a legitimate criminal background in Mexico. And so I think the focus should mostly be on what are their intentions for going to volunteer in Ukraine, and it can't just be taken word for word. So, for example, that cartel Aguila 7 who said he was going for humanitarian reasons. It's like, okay, let's dive a little deeper. And how do you know how to already operate a drone like a pro? All right, to wrap this up, I kind of want to give you guys an overview of what the implications and threat trajectory of this looks like, because that's all I can really think about after reading this report and all of the information surrounding this investigation. And like I've said time and time again, I care about the human toll and what this looks like for the future of these cartels and their transnational expansion. So, of course, there's this regional security impact. Okay, cartels with FPV drone expertise could launch precision strikes, extremely precise, more than they already are, against, of course, rival groups or state targets inside Mexico. I mean, just today, we saw that an official from the Fiscalia in Tamaulipas, Reynosa, was, let me actually just read it to you exactly, because I tweeted about it. He was attacked in a brazen broad daylight attack. I mean, he was shot at, but I think that this is sending a broader message. Ernesto Vázquez Reina with the Fiscalía in Reynosa was executed, known as El Padrino, or the Godfather. I know you guys hate when I do that, the accent thing, but it's not me doing an accent. I speak Spanish, so I'm going to read it the way it's supposed to be said. The godfather of politicians, he was said to have taken large bribes to let criminals walk free and had ties to major crude oil theft rings, of course, that being along the border. And I was actually told that his death was ordered from very high up the food chain. So, with that in mind, that happened today, okay? You see this, uh, a fiscal essentially getting, it's like the Mexico's version of the attorney general's office, um, being gunned down. These FPV drone tactics are what's going to replace those brazen daylight shootings. And there are a lot of politicians, as we've talked about time and time again, that are on multiple hit lists or blacklists, whether that be they're being watched by the U.S. government, or they're on bad terms with the Mexican government, or they've gotten on the wrong side of someone in organized crime in Mexico. These drone strikes prevent any collateral damage on the cartel side. These guys don't have to go in and risk being caught or their lives. I mean, they don't really get caught anyways, but you know what I mean? It really condenses and simplifies the attack. So, of course, rival cartels, state officials become targets of these increased drone tactics, and this raises the threat level from area denial to targeted assassinations, which we are to an extent already seeing. Now, drone-enabled narco tanks or heavily armored vehicles, all of these precautions that Mexican authorities are taking in order to combat the cartels or at least maintain a level of protection from their weaponry kind of fall flat now, because they're learning how to penetrate any area of weakness. Now, there's also tactical knowledge proliferation, right? The open volunteer system in Ukraine, which, if I'm being completely honest, I've had a problem with since the get-go, because what the fuck do you mean people can just volunteer to go fight this war and learn all these crazy tactics and then leave with, they get no benefits, there's no support. You already see a lot of American veterans struggling with mental health and a lot of, normal life things, and they are supposed to have some level of support. This is not happening with volunteers going to Ukraine. Okay. So the open volunteer system in Ukraine may unintentionally serve as a global training pipeline for asymmetric warfare tactics. I think, honestly, this was just a matter of time. And as the war continues to be prolonged and goes on, we're going to see this happening more and more. I think it's also important to keep in mind, okay, of course, we know this isn't the only war going on right now. If we look at Israel-Palestine, Israel is where Pegasus, the cyber warfare technology, the, cyber spyware, the spyware technology came out of. You really don't think that you're going to have Mexican cartel operatives or any organized criminals perhaps going over there to further their knowledge of hacking and controlling mobile devices or any sort of tech? Okay, any area that's impacted by war allows for this level of vulnerability for criminals to go in and take advantage of what they could perhaps gain. And this Ukraine example, this investigation, paints that picture bright as fucking day. Other non-state actors or criminal networks could replicate every single model that they see and learn about in these regions. So essentially, Ukraine too is now facing a trade-off, okay? Maintaining international volunteer support versus preventing dual-use training exploitation. How do you even navigate that? I mean, I don't have the answer. I'm not an expert in this, but it's pretty insane if you ask me. So, of course, these vetting policies and more oversight is super necessary in order to prevent this from happening. But I'm sure, of course, many individuals have already slipped through the cracks. And what do we know about the cartels? One thing about them is they are fast learners. I can appreciate that. I am one too. I'm not saying that I would go and learn that. Or maybe, but I wouldn't use it to do harm. These very individuals who have probably already slipped through the cracks, made their way to Ukraine, and perhaps already gotten out, learned what they needed to learn, are going to go back to wherever it may be, whether that's Colombia or Mexico or you name it. Any criminal organization that took advantage of this, whether there be from anywhere around the globe, will go back to their home country and teach everyone else the very tactics that they learned in Ukraine. Very deadly tactics at that. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to another episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original with Katarina Schultz. I found this story to be really interesting, and I hope you guys do too. So be sure to like and subscribe and rate the podcast. And as always, see you next time.